Welcome to the Coherence Cookbook podcast series. I'm Terry Gibson and I worked with GNDR on the production of this cookbook. This is the third and final episode of the series, and in this episode we're turning from the key ingredients we discussed to see how those are applied in particular recipes. Every good cookbook has great recipes. Now you're familiar with the ingredients, we're going to show you how to make use of the recipes. The starting point is this table on pages 17 and 18 of the cookbook, which links the ingredients we've just considered to specific recipes, such as those from Guatemala and the Philippines that we saw in part 1, and those from Burundi, Zimbabwe and Peru, which we encountered briefly in part 2. So let's look at how these and others link to our key ingredients by using the table. For example, suppose you want to understand how to work with structures and regulations. You can look down the table and see that 3 of the ingredients are illustrated in the recipe from Cadiz in the Philippines. So let's go and look at that recipe now. Structures and regulations can be complex and difficult to understand, but the recipe from Cadiz city in the Philippines shows that the opposite is the case. In this city there used to be very little connection between different departments and plans. There was limited coordination. That was before the city was struck by Typhoon Haiyan. In the wake of that, the local CSO started looking at the situation and trying to identify ways to coordinate activity and to link climate change adaptation, disaster risk reduction and sustainable development. They were helped in this by the fact that they'd built very good relationships with the local government departments. And so they started establishing structures at community level and creating links between community, civil society organisation and local government, so that they were talking to each other and negotiating with each other over coherent ways of working forward. As a result of this, they were able to link their activities to the many local level plans and national level plans that applied in these areas, which enabled them to get stronger support from government and in some cases to get funding. The result is that Cadiz has now leapt up the rankings in terms of its performance as a resilient city in the Philippines. And this has been the result of doing the difficult work of understanding structures and regulations and working with them to develop coherent plans of action. So you can see that key ingredient 14, encouraging local organisations to lead in planning of actions and in coordinating their implementation, was illustrated in this recipe, and also ingredient 15, developing an understanding of and strengthening relationships with local government structures, and finally key ingredient 17, identifying and building links between local coherent action and relevant policies and plans. Looking at the table again, let's look at partnerships, platforms and networks, and we can see from the table that the Medina recipe from Niger is relevant, including key ingredients 4 and 6. So let's see how they're applied in the Medina recipe. People in Medina in Niger face a very different set of challenges. The village is on the edge of the Sahel, and with the desert creeping southwards, and with the additional impacts of climate change, people are increasingly exposed to uncertainty in their lives and livelihoods, drought and famine on the one hand, occasional flooding on the other. Making sense of this and acting on it depended in this case on building partnerships. The partnerships were between local community members stretched across 5 villages in the area and linking to the municipality and other layers of government. And there were 2 aspects to it. One was the development of an early warning system which was rooted in local household vulnerability data, which was gathered together by the participants and shared with the municipality and the government. The second aspect of the partnership was to interpret that information and identify effective activities to strengthen resilient livelihoods, including identifying drought-resistant crops addressing soil erosion, training on conservation farming, along with addressing other threats such as road safety. So we can see that key ingredient 4, participating in networks to share learning and unite in advocacy for change, was important in the recipe, and also drawing understanding together, key ingredient 6, creating spaces to negotiate and reach agreement for coherent action. Here's a recipe which relates to resources for implementation, and looking at the table we can see that the recipe from Kitui and Makueni is relevant here, illustrating key ingredient 12. So let's go and look at that recipe now. People face similar challenges to those in Medina Asia, those of climate change leading to increasing tendency towards drought, crop failure and damage to livelihoods. The CSO working in the area recognised that the community had actions they wanted to take, for example building dams to provide water for irrigation, but what they needed was resources to do this. The CSO worked with the county government on climate regulations and on climate funding, and enabled them to tap international level funds, along with some funds from international donors, which provided seed funding to undertake some of these activities. What they did was build bridges between the local community who had a vision for the action they wanted to take and the resources needed to implement that vision. They've been successful in undertaking some dam building projects. They still need far more resource to address all the calls for action in the area. The recipe illustrates the way that the CSO can take an important role in securing resources. So we can see that in that recipe, key ingredient 12, building long-term funding relationships with responsive donors, was important to get the resources needed for those programs. I hope this brief overview has given you a flavour of the recipes in this book and the ingredients that they're composed from. Get hold of this information in the book on the website and apply it in your own particular context and situations and get cooking. For all GNDR's Coherence resources and to participate in the Coherence practice group in the community platform, you can go to the web links on the screen now, which will provide you with all the information you need and connect you up to other people working on Coherence.